Thank you. The last day of a conference is always bittersweet. You look forward to coming, and it's wonderful to be here to visit with old friends and make new friends. But I must say this has been a really wonderful Congress. And I just want to add my comments that Daniel has done an incredible job in putting together a wonderful program and wonderful events. So thank you very much. Let me get some water. In 1977, the late Michael Mahoney called cognitive behavior therapy the barbarians at the gates. Here we were banging at the door of the psychotherapy establishment and the psychodynamic therapy group in particular. We were demanding entrance, let us in, and they're saying, not going to happen. 4 decades later, we've become the guardians of the gates, and CBT has become the gold standard for psychotherapy around the world. And this was 2 decades after Albert Ellis had introduced and promoted his revolutionary treatment of rational therapy. He and his early students and co-workers started a journey, and we have to think of it as a journey that has brought us today to Cluj, through the various modifications of rational therapy to rational emotive therapy and rational emotive behavior therapy. This willingness, or at times a hard-fought unwillingness to modify our model, was the beginning of our path of development and growth. You know, it's interesting, there are many, many terms within the CBT community. And I think we have to look at them as branding terms. That this is us. This RT, RET, REBT, rational behavior modification, cognitive therapy. And certainly my background in working with Beck was Beck's brand was cognitive therapy. And my first book, 1983, was called Cognitive Therapy with Couples and Groups. And then, I think 2 books later, I published a book that I called Cognitive Behavior Therapy. And I must tell you, and you can't tell anyone I said this, you'll all keep a secret, right? Dr. Beck was very upset with me. He said, we don't do CBT, we do cognitive therapy. That's our brand. And then there's cognitive behavior modification. There was multimodal therapy, which I always thought was interesting. It kind of implies that everybody else was unimodal. And we've all been multimodal. And certainly Al was a major pioneer in multimodality. Dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance commitment therapy. And I think we have to look at these as brand names. So if I go to a restaurant here in Cluj, and I'll say, I'd like a Coke. And they say, we have Pepsi. Okay. Now what I'm asking for is not a Coke, I'm asking for a cola. And if they say, oh no, all we serve here is Cluj Cola, good. So we have to think of CBT as a collection of brand names. And, you know, for some of these brand names, they've fallen into disuse so that CBT has become a generic term. And we have to decide, do we want to just say, let's become part of the generic group? Or should we maintain our brand name? Should we maintain our identity amidst all these changes and developments? And I think this is a very important question. Should we continue to label ourselves, to brand ourselves as REBT? And this can be very problematic because people say, well, you're a small splinter group. Well, no, we're a small founding group. Or maybe we're a large founding group. And because there are a number of attributes of REBT. It's a method. It's a mode of thinking. Because part of what we want to do in therapy is not just therapize a client. We want them to learn a way of thinking. We want to really change a philosophy of how they view themselves, how they view the world, how they view the future. It's a model of approaching life's challenges. It's multimodal because REBT has always looked at cognition, behavior, emotion, temperament, culture, and diversity. A key word here is outreach, and this is something Wendy just alluded to. We can look around and see where we are, but it's unfortunate that we don't often look at where we've come from. So I try to make a list of, I guess, where I think we've come from. It's been very troubling to me as a teacher and supervisor to work with a young student, and I say, well, are you familiar with the work of, and they look at me and they say no. There was an example that I found troubling. And again, I can say this publicly, I'm not telling any secrets, because it was published and in print. Jeff Young, the founder of Schema Therapy, was interviewed, and the interviewer said to Jeff, you know, Dr. Young, your work sounds very much like the work of Alfred Adler. And Jeff's response was, I'm not familiar with that work, which I found troubling, A, because why not? And B, how could he not know this? And I find many of our students, and I think this is due to us as teachers and supervisors, want everyone to think that either we started the model or that it started yesterday. Many of you are familiar with the book Feeling Good by David Burns. And it was published in 1980 and has sold 6 million copies. It should happen to me. The idea, and I used to be asked, did Dr. Burns study with Dr. Beck? No. But the publisher of Feeling Good implied in the literature that David Burns founded cognitive therapy. And there was a discussion about this. And David Burns was asked to change that. And Dave's response was, I can't control what the publisher's publicity says. But the implication is that he founded cognitive therapy. So I made a list of what I call the heroes of REBT. And I've invariably left someone out. Certainly Epictetus, Alfred Adler, and Ellis would always call himself a neo-Adlerian and credit Adler as being one of the founders. But I also found that if you look at the work of the Japanese psychiatrist from the 30s, Morita talked about looking at life the way it is. Wolpe, certainly a really good cognitive behavior therapist, not in his view. He felt that cognitive therapy offered nothing to behavior therapy. Certainly Albert Ellis, George Kelly's personal construct therapy, Viktor Frankl, also a neo-Adlerian, Beck, Maxime Maltzby, Mike Mahoney, who gave us a very constructivist view, which I must admit I never really understood. And I would say to Mike, what do you mean by constructivist? He says, well, we all construct our own reality. Yeah. Where's the news to that? But there was a whole model about that. Arnold Lazarus's multimodal therapy, Don Meichenbaum, Marshall Linehan, Steve Hayes, Deserlia and the Nezus, Marty Seligman, and positive psychology. And Seligman would say it's a cognitive behavior therapy. Paul Gilbert, Zindel Siegel, Daniel David, Jeff Young, Wendy. And I think Wendy's brilliance in his single session therapy. I have students say, you know, my agency only gives us 4 sessions. And my response is, okay, what's the problem? I need more. How much more? You've got 4. How are you going to best use them? If I were to say to you, I'm going to refer a therapist to you, a patient to you as a therapist. You have 10 sessions. How are you going to use those 10 sessions? I don't know. Well, yeah, you do. The first session, maybe 2, to establish the relationship, the therapeutic bond, outline the therapeutic alliance. And the last 2 sessions are dealing with closure and termination. So even if I said you had 10 sessions, you don't have 10 sessions, you have 6 sessions. How do you address the work in those 6 sessions? So what Wendy has done is said, okay, I have 1 session. What do I do with it? How do I spend the time effectively? Ann Vernon, Christine Doyle, Ray DiGiuseppe, Juana David, Tullio Scrimmali. These, to me, are some of the giants, and I've left out many people, and I apologize for that. But I'm limited in my time here. Each of the pioneers of REBT added a new twist, or addressed a hitherto untouched problem, or an untouched or unviewed issue, or worked within a treatment venue, dealing with a particular patient population, a particular treatment context, or a cultural variant. What modifications do we need to make for different cultures? It's not one size fits all. We have to make modifications. Too often, the new developments in REBT and CBT more broadly have been renamed or repackaged iterations of what could easily be found in the existing literature. I recall an experience I had with my good friend Ray. We attended a meeting. It was the presidential address. I hope you'll forgive me for sharing this, Ray. And it was a very crowded meeting in a very large auditorium. The association at that time, Advanced for the Behavior Therapy. And Ray and I were standing in the back, listening to the presidential address. I won't mention the speaker. And the outgoing president is giving his address and talking about his vision for the future. And I'm standing there, and Ray is getting more and more upset. He's shaking his head, and he's muttering to himself. And I said, what's upsetting you? And Ray said to me, Al said all these things years ago. And no one else is claiming credit for it. And never once gave a historical attribution or citation that they invented the wheel. That one day they woke up from a dream and said, I'm going to take a disc and I'm going to drill a hole right in the middle of it. And then take a second disc and drill a hole in the middle of that. And put a shaft between them. And I'm going to call it the wheel. And we find people keep inventing the wheel. Now, why does this happen? Interesting. I think therapeutic narcissism, that we like to see our name on something, that we invented this particular model. I think that's part of it. I think a larger part is that we are not aware of the theoretical, philosophical, contextual content and overall goals of a treatment model. That many of us have been educated in a unimodal model. That's all we know. For those of you who are students, look at the list. And if you want a copy of the slides, write to me. I'll be glad to send you a copy of the Keynote slides. My email address is very complicated, so you may want to write this down. My email address is artcbt@AOL. That's it, artcbt. So I wouldn't be hard to find. And we find ourselves working within a very rigid model. That, Ray spoke the other day, and I spoke about use of terms like countertransference. And I can't tell you the number of times people have said to me, we don't use that language. That belongs to the old days. Oh, it's good language. Why not use it? It's convenient. CBT generally has had a profound influence on behavior therapy. Years ago, when I had traveled and spoken many times in Scandinavia, when I first spoke in Scandinavia, to bring CBT to Scandinavia, there was terrible difficulty because the behavior therapy group says, we don't need you. We do all there is that needs to be done. And now we find many of these behavior therapists, Swedish behavior therapists, are now very ardent cognitive behavior therapists. So that EABT is now EABCT. And AABT, American Association for the Advancement of Behavior Therapy, is now the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. The number of countries and cultures represented here in Cluj evidence the growth and importance of an international REBT emphasis. And this is key. We're an international movement, not just a splinter. And I think we have to view ourselves in this way. We need to develop venues for sharing REBT. Too often, we preach to the choir. Like right now, I'm preaching to the choir that if I said, how many of you don't believe in REBT or in CBT? I suspect there'd be very few hands going up. That obviously you believe in this and that's why you're here. But how are we spreading the gospel? How are we spreading the word? Well, we can do this through journals. That we have to look to our journals. But here again, who gets the journals? So we're writing for ourselves. which is very lovely that we write for ourselves. How are we disseminating REBT in non-REBT or non-CBT journals? How do we get into the mainstream? So we have to think of a way of doing this. Websites, not a big deal to put together a website. We can put together websites. But who do we attract to the website? What reasons would people seek out our website? How do we get to the people who don't know what we do? That basically our work is being stolen without attribution. Well, we can do workshops. And here again, who do we do workshops for? Do we do workshops for the general population? Do we try to get onto the curricula of various universities that are non-CBT universities? Podcasts, local, regional, national, and international meetings. In this regard, what I'd like to see us do, and maybe we're already doing this and I'm not aware of it, put together a task force for outreach into psychology, psychiatry, social work, nursing, education. I published a book a couple of years ago called Cognitive Behavior Therapy in Social Work Practice. It was a lovely book. It was a very good book. I must say it was an excellent book. It didn't sell very well because social workers, it's not that they don't believe in CBT, they don't know about it. How are we influencing social workers? Or nurses for that matter? We need to develop, I don't know, maybe we ought to require as part of graduate programs a year of missionary work. We dress people up in a I don't know, a special outfit. Maybe we can copy Al, the way he dressed. And we send them out into the world to let people know that we exist. Now, the problem for us is that many of the pioneers have passed on. Their places have been taken by their students, many of us, and now by the grandchildren of the founders, or even the great-grandchildren. What I think is essential for us to think about is continuity. How do we build continuity? Now, if we look historically, Gestalt therapy was very, very important at a certain point. But Gestalt therapy is not widely known at this point. Why? What happened to Gestalt therapy? The founder died, and there was no one to take their place. If it's the personality of the founder that provided the glue that held us together, the model will experience an erosion and a limiting of the model. There will always be the true believers, and they may want to limit or avoid any advances or development of the model to preserve the perceived authenticity. Among my experiences, I studied at the Alfred Adler Institute in New York. And we had a staff meeting, and one of the younger staff members said, "Why don't we try this?" Now, this was in 1965, 66. And there was a woman in the room who had studied with Adler in Vienna. And she said, "No, no, no." Why not? She said Adler would not have approved. How do we know this? She was going to keep Adlerian psychology where it was in the 30s. And it's interesting, if you were to apply to present a paper or a workshop at the National Adlerian Congress, the North American Society of Adlerian Psychology, NASAP, a requirement to present at NASAP is that you had presented at NASAP before. So you're getting people talking to themselves. And the group of Adlerians gets smaller and older. And that's not good. So if we look to our own model, it tells us what we have to do. One of the things that Adler would teach is courage. He'd say to a client, you had much more courage as a child. And the client would say, what do you mean? He said, well, when you were a child and you tried to walk, you fell. And what did you do? You got up and you tried again until you got it right. Otherwise, we'd all be sitting on the floor whining about the fact that I'm not walking. A willingness to be flexible. That doesn't mean twisting and turning to the demands of others. It means learning what's new and including that in what we do. For example, the information we have in neuroscience, in technology. How do we include that in what we do? Are we willing to be vulnerable? To say something publicly when someone says, oh, that's dumb. Are we willing to be fallible? To make mistakes? Are we willing to be creative? Now, on this point, I would say some of the most creative people I know in the field are sitting in this room. We have to be creative. Not only about what we do, but where we go. And we can't simply be reactive. We need to be proactive. We need to address community needs. We need to be culturally sensitive and aware. We need to focus on empirical support for what we do. I love books. I have lots of books. Lots and lots of books. And I can't resist going into a bookstore and looking through the shelves of old books and always finding something of interest. And many years ago, I went into an old bookstore and I found a book written by Pearl Buck, Nobel Prize winner. She wrote The Good Earth. And I picked up this book, and it was called Peony. I took it home, and I have reread it many times over the years. And I thought about Peony in putting together this keynote. Let me tell you about Peony. In the city of Kaifeng in China, there was a center for Jewish habitation in the 19th century. Now, you might not be aware there's a large Jewish population in China. Many Jewish merchants and their families were very successful. They worked there as merchants on the famous Silk Route. And consistent with their tradition, the Jewish merchants built a large and beautiful synagogue as a center for their worship and for the community. The story of Peony is about a Jewish family and their life and interactions with the local Chinese population. It's a story of interchange of ideas and beliefs, but also about the intermarriage of the Jewish families into the majority Chinese culture until the core of the beliefs of the Jews were lost to sight to all but the most observant. Peony, the heroine of the novel, was originally a bondmaiden in the house of David ben Ezra. In her later years, she became the abbess of the Buddhist monastery. And reflective in her senior years, as the abbess of the monastery, she pondered her life. And this is quoted directly from Peony. In the city, the synagogue was now a heap of dust. Brick by brick, the poor of the city had taken the last ruin of the synagogue away. The carvings were gone too, and there remained at last only 3 great stone tablets. And of these 3, then only 2. These 2 stood stark under the sky for a long time. And then a Christian, a foreigner, bought them and carried them away. Long Peony, now aged, pondered her life experience. She thought of what she had done and not done. She said, was I right in my actions? And as often happened in her great age, the answer came to her. Nothing is lost, she repeated. They live again and again among our people, she thought. Where there is a bolder brow, a brighter eye, there is one like him. Where a voice sings most clearly, there is one. Where a line is drawn most cleverly to make a picture clear, a carving strong, there is one. Where a statesman stands most honorable, a judge most just, there is one. Where a scholar is most learned, there is one. Where a woman is both beautiful and wise, there is one. Their blood is lively in whatever frame it flows. And when that frame is gone, its very dust enriches the still kindly soil. Their spirit is born anew in every generation. They are no more, and yet they live forever. Is this the fate of the revolutionary and visionary work of Albert Ellis? Will his ideas be subsumed, interwoven, renamed, imitated, stolen, or repurposed into the ideas and theories and therapies of countless other models? Or will the ideas of REBT stand firm and well used into the growth and development by his students, many of us, and the numbers of generations to follow? Not CBT generically, but REBT more specifically. We need to learn and teach the work of our founders and pioneers, all of them. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to learn to better use and develop the wheels we have. We need to be proud to stand on the shoulders of giants. This lofty perspective allows us to view the past, experience the present, and move REBT to the future. And this is, I think, our model. We look to the past for information. We look to the future so we know where we're going, but we focus on the present. And to me, this symbolizes REBT. It's not a single view, but many views, past, present, and future. Now, I'd be remiss, some of you, I don't know how many of you were at the dinner last night. There was singing going on. And as you know, that Albert wrote many, many songs. So in his honor, I wrote a song, okay? And as a shame attack exercise, I'm going to ask you all to sing this song with me, okay? People are getting nervous. I used an American folk song called "Oh Susanna." It goes like this. Oh Susanna, don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. It rained so hard the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death. Susanna, don't you cry. So now you know the melody. Are you ready to sing? You ready? Okay. A musical tribute to Albert Ellis. Ready? Oh, he came from New York City with Sigmund in his sights. He started small but ended up at fantastic heights. Oh, Al Ellis, there's so much we could say. For all that you have given us, we honor you today. Second verse. He spoke of masturbation, of shoulds and musts and oughts. He taught us how to recognize our irrational thoughts. Oh, Al Ellis, there's so much we could say. For all that you have given us, we honor you today. Third verse. He talked the talk and walked the walk and pioneered the way for us to practice CBT, which flourishes today. Oh, Al Ellis, there's so much we could say. For all that you have given us, we honor you today. Next verse. He shocked us with his style, a therapeutic puck, who peppered his discussions with words like shit and you were listening. Good. Oh, Al Ellis, there's so much we could say. For all that you have given us, we honor you today. He offered change in therapy, a philosophic view, taught throughout the world today from him to all of you. Oh, Al Ellis, there's so much we could say. For all that you have given us, we honor you today. Finale. Now you're gone, we honor you. What else would you expect? We send you this last message to Al with great respect. Big ending. Oh, Al Ellis, there's so much we could say. For all that you have given us,